The fog in Little Witchfold had the peculiar texture of boiled flannel, thick, damp, and possessing a faint odor of old wood smoke and wet church pews. Lord Peter Wimsey, who had once spent a term dabbling in meteorological optics, purely for the pleasure of proving his tutor wrong about fog bows, leaned out of the Daimler's window and announced with some satisfaction, "We are in the bosom of authentic English Gothic." A little more mildew, and we'd have the makings of a Radcliffe heroine bunter, having grown stoically accustomed to his lordship's predilection for literary commentary in moments of mild peril, merely murmured, "Very good, my lord," and shifted down a gear to take the next incline with the solemnity of a hearse. The village of Little Witchfold, if it could be said to possess a village beyond one retired post office and an inn that no one visited twice, was set atop a North Dorset ridge like a brooch pinned too high on a dreary cardigan. Wimsey's visit, it must be said, was not intended for crime. He had come at the half-hearted insistence of his cousin Gerald, the Duke of Denver, who wished to discuss pheasant counts and ecclesiastical tithes, both of which seemed to Wimsey better left to gamekeepers and deans. Instead, he found himself ascending the drive to Greystanes, a peculiar manor in the Jacobean Gothic manner, that is to say, slightly mad, complete with mock turrets, a misbehaving sundial, and a gargoyle shaped suspiciously like Queen Victoria. The place belonged to the late Colonel Chilcombe, recently deceased under circumstances no more alarming than gout and the third bottle of port, and now inhabited by his niece and heir, Miss Leonora Chilcombe, a pale and rather serious young woman with a fondness for carving devotional scenes out of beeswax. Wimsey had not been in the house 10 minutes before he noted, with a slight lift of the eyebrow, that the grandfather clock in the vestibule struck the half-hour 3 minutes late. And, more curiously, twice. It was not, strictly speaking, a murder that brought Lord Peter into matters at Greystanes, but a letter. Not one addressed to him, heavens no, but one posted 3 days earlier by Leonora, to the vicar, Reverend Pindle, concerning a matter of spiritual unrest in the house. The good vicar, alarmed at the vague suggestion of whispers through the floorboards and a sense that the bed was already turned down, had taken it upon himself to forward the letter to the bishop, who had passed it in jest to the archdeacon, who in turn had shown it to the Bishop of Balechester during a regrettably tedious luncheon, at which point it had found its way, via Lady Rossiter's bridge table and the Honourable Freddie Arbuthnot, into Wimsey's hands over cocktails at the Drones. "You know how she signs off," Freddie had drawled. "The house is not empty at night. Gives one the jolly creeps." Now, as Wimsey was led up the main stair by the tight-lipped housekeeper, Mrs. Grieve, an alarming female, he later described her, with the expression of a tomb warden who's had to cancel the funeral tea. He paused at the third riser and knelt. "I say," he murmured, peering down, "how curious. There's wax in the groove. Bayberry, if I'm not mistaken." Most ecclesiastical of her, Mrs. Grieve sniffed. "Miss Chilcombe makes her own candles, sir." All over the house. "Gets into the carpets." She gestured him toward the late colonel's room with the air of someone offering a sacrificial goat. Wimsey entered the chamber and found, with the subtle satisfaction of a man proven right in his suspicions, that although the bed was neatly made, the coverlet bore the slight, unmistakable indentation of someone having recently sat on its edge, perhaps even lain down. One of the pillows bore the faintest concavity. The glass on the dressing table was slightly fogged. Most tellingly, the candlestick by the bedside had been extinguished, but the wick was still black. Wimsey turned, smiling faintly. "Mrs. Grieve, you are quite certain no one has slept in this room since the colonel's passing?" The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "Quite certain, my lord. No one dares go in, not even Miss Leonora. She says she dreams of the colonel's step on the landing." Dr. Wallam gave her a tincture. Wimsey's smile deepened, less with amusement than anticipation. "And yet," he said, almost conversationally, Someone has taken the trouble to turn down the bed. He paused, tapped the edge of the candle, and added with a lightness that masked the sudden tightening in his chest. Curious, don't you think? Especially for a man 4 days in the ground, Mrs. Grieve did not flinch, but something about the pinched corners of her mouth shifted, as if to grip some internal protest. She folded her hands stiffly in front of her apron, fingers slightly reddened from a lifetime of scrubbing brass and upholding the better class of rural terror. "I suppose," she said at last, "that perhaps I turned it down myself." Without thinking, Whimsy turned with an exaggerated flourish, the unconscious duties of a dutiful domestic, as instinctive as removing one's gloves in church or misplacing the sugar tongs in moments of stress. "I wouldn't say that, my lord. No, of course not. One never does." He strolled to the bedside table again, hands in pockets, his long frame bowed forward slightly like a gentleman preparing to engage a difficult chess opening. With a forefinger, he drew a circle on the surface of the little table. Dust, very faint, revealed itself in the arc of his fingertip, except in a small rectangle precisely where a book might have rested. He sniffed. "Tell me, Mrs. Grieve, did the Colonel read in bed?" "No, sir. He couldn't abide it. Said books were for libraries and sermonizing." The light hurt his eyes. Whimsy tilted his head. "And yet, something sat here. Recently enough that your industrious polish has not had its revenge." He turned now, examining the fireplace, which had been neatly laid but not lit. The curtains had been drawn halfway, an odd choice, as Whimsy noted silently. People either left them wide open or fully shut. This had the look of a half-hearted concealment, as though someone had started the gesture and then stopped, startled by a sound. Then, something else. On the hearth rug, beneath the edge of the fender, barely visible unless one stooped, which naturally Whimsy did, a faint grey thread, coarse and short, caught like a reluctant guest at the edge of the polished brass. "Mrs. Grieve," he murmured without looking up, "did the Colonel wear tweeds in bed?" "No, my lord. Flannel nightshirt, always. Then unless the local foxes have learned to undo latches and read devotional wax carvings, someone else was in this room. Quite recently." Wearing something rather less ecclesiastical, Mrs. Grieve gave a small, dry noise that might have been intended as a cough, but sounded suspiciously like alarm with a bonnet on. "I think, if you please," she said, "Miss Leonora might be better to answer such questions. If you'll follow me, my lord." "Of course," said Whimsy. "After all, what is a ghost story without the heroine?" Miss Leonora Chilcombe was discovered in what had once been the morning room, a north-facing chamber of that peculiar draughty elegance found only in old Dorset homes and neglected naval academies. She stood by the window with a shawl wrapped about her shoulders and an expression not quite as frail as her wax carvings had implied. She turned as they entered, her manner polite but distinctly not warm. "Lord Peter Whimsy. Thank you for coming, though I must say I'm not sure what you hope to find." "Miss Chilcombe," said Whimsy, bowing slightly, "I rarely hope to find anything. It's terribly lowering to the expectations. I merely stumble about and things tend to occur." She gave him a measured look and then, "Did Reverend Pindle write to you?" No. I'm afraid you've been the subject of harmless gossip. My curiosity was piqued by your remarks about the bed and the peculiar sense of habitation in an otherwise dead room. I found the imagery delightful." She flushed slightly. "I don't remember what I wrote. I was not sleeping well, so I understand. Dreams of footsteps, I gather." "Yes, repeatedly. Every night since my uncle's passing. I would wake at precisely 3 o'clock, hearing the tread upon the landing, always the same number of steps, as though he walked from his room to mine, but never opened the door." "Odd," said Whimsy, and seated himself with the nonchalance of a man about to ask something unpleasant. "Did the Colonel walk the house at night while alive?" "Never. He had gout. Movement at night was impossible." He rang for a bell if he needed anything. Which bell? The one in the hall. I had it disconnected when he died. I couldn't bear the sound of it. Quite right, murmured Whimsy. Bells ought never to ring without purpose. Causes theological confusion. He folded his hands. Miss Chilcombe, might I ask who else is currently residing in the house? She gave him the faintest pause before replying. There is myself, of course. Mrs. Grieve, our housekeeper. Also our temporary maid, a girl from the village. Susan, a decent sort, though she's only been here a week. Mr. Elphinstone, my uncle's solicitor, was here last weekend to go over the will, but he left Sunday. No other guests. No one else has keys. Former servants, estranged cousins, romantic interlopers from less reputable episodes. Leonora flushed again. More pronounced this time, but not quite in anger. No, certainly not. Whimsy nodded. I ask only because I believe someone has recently been in the Colonel's room. Not long ago. Last night, perhaps. She frowned. I swear to you, Lord Peter, I've not entered that room since his death. I've hardly left mine after dusk, and Mrs. Grieve has been strict about keeping it locked. Ah, yes, locked. Might I ask, was the key always in her possession? Leonora hesitated again. Yes, I believe so. Then either the lock is flawed, or someone else possesses a key. She did not answer. Whimsy rose and paced slowly to the mantel. He ran a finger along the top, more for effect than investigation. May I ask, Miss Chilcombe, was your uncle on good terms with the villagers? She seemed surprised. Not at all. He disliked people, particularly Reverend Pindle. They had dreadful arguments about the church roof. Ecclesiastical tiling is a contentious subject. There was also an incident last summer with a local boy. I don't know the details. My uncle never explained, but he forbade me from speaking to the lad again. Do you recall the boy's name? She looked uncomfortable. Wilfred. Wilfred Hinks. His mother worked as laundress here for a time years ago. Whimsy's eyebrows lifted, just a touch. Hinks. Yes, I seem to remember the name. Ran off to sea at 15, came back with a limp and a poor attitude. Told everyone he'd seen a shark off Portsmouth, which turned out to be a coal scow. Leonora gave him a look of mild disbelief, and he smiled faintly. Forgive me. One picks up things, and one wonders whether the footsteps you heard were memory or someone else's guilt made manifest. She turned toward the window. I don't believe in ghosts, Lord Peter. Good, he said gently. Neither do I, but I find the things people mistake for ghosts tend to have more interesting reasons for existing. He stood and offered her a small bow. If you'll permit me, I shall speak to the village. A fine fog, a mysterious bed, footsteps at 3 o'clock. It's nearly a novel already. I promise not to knock on too many doors after tea. As he left the room, Whimsy turned back only once. One more question, Miss Chilcombe. Did your uncle ever lock his bedroom door from the inside? She nodded. Always. Habit and fear, I think. Indeed, he murmured. Then the mystery deepens. Because last night it was not locked at all. With that, he left her and strode back down the hall, already considering whether Wilfred Hinks was in fact the sort of young man to wear coarse grey tweed, or whether someone else altogether had turned down the Colonel's bed. The following morning dawned with a damp, overcast sky, the air thick and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Whimsy, having taken to rising early in pursuit of his musings, found himself wandering the corridors of Greystanes before the household had fully roused. The shadows of the previous night seemed to cling to the wood panelling, the faint scent of cigars mingling oddly with the lingering trace of lavender from the vicar's garden. His first task was to examine the Colonel's chamber once more, this time with the sober scrutiny of a man piecing together a puzzle rather than an inquisitive guest. The room was precisely as Mrs. Grieve had left it the night before. The bed neatly turned down, the window ajar despite the chill, and the polished bureau reflecting the grey light through a slight film of dust. A faint trace of tobacco smoke still hung in the air, curiously out of place given the Colonel's reputed abstinence. Whimsy's eyes settled on the clock upon the mantelpiece. It was precisely 3 minutes fast. He tapped the glass gently. "An imperfect timekeeper, much like its owner," he murmured. Yet the slow chime downstairs suggested something more deliberate. He made his way to the main hall where the grandfather clock stood, a ponderous edifice of oak and brass, its face smudged with the patina of years. It struck the hour with a solemn triple toll, the third reluctant and uneven. Whimsy recalled the vicar's remark on the clock's slowness, the bell's silent since the funeral. A quick inspection revealed the pendulum's swing was irregular, slowed by a minute warp to the mechanism's teeth. Whether by accident or neglect was uncertain, but Whimsy filed the detail away. Time itself was behaving oddly at Greystanes. Next, he sought out Mrs. Grieve, who was beginning to orchestrate the morning's domestic bustle with practiced efficiency. Her face was more guarded than the previous evening, and she answered Whimsy's questions with a practiced neutrality. "Mrs. Grieve, I wonder if you could tell me more about the household's routine, particularly the servants' habits regarding the Colonel's room." Mrs. Grieve pursed her lips. "Well, sir, the Colonel was a stickler for punctuality. His valet, Mr. Dobb, would ensure the room was prepared precisely at 7 each morning. The curtains drawn to the east, the bed turned down, and a pot of tea ready by his bedside. No one else ever entered unbidden. And Mr. Dobb?" "Mr. Dobb retired recently, sir, on ill health. Since then, the duties have been divided among the staff, but none with quite the same devotion. Is there any chance someone else might have access to the room at night? Keys, for instance?" Mrs. Grieve's eyes flickered. "The Colonel kept the key on his person, sir. But the housekeeper has a master key for emergencies." "Thank you," Whimsy said, though her hesitation suggested more than she revealed. His inquiries then took him to the kitchen where he found Maud, the cook, wielding a large wooden spoon with the precision of a military officer commanding a charge of pots and pans. She was a stout woman with a sharp eye and a tongue to match. "Ah, Lord Peter," she greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "If it's gossip you're after, you've come to the right place." Whimsy smiled faintly. "I seek truth, Mrs. Maud, but I'll accept gossip as a suitable substitute." She chuckled, then leaned in conspiratorially. "There's been odd goings-on at night, sir. Strange noises, whispers in the corridors, and the servants saying they see shadows where there shouldn't be any. I tell 'em it's the wind or rats. But Miss Leonora is frightfully upset. Shadows and whispers," Whimsy echoed. "Indeed. The house is old, and the walls have ears, or so they say. But last night I heard something myself, a creaking like footsteps in the library when no one should be there." "Who else has access to the library at night?" "Only the family and trusted staff, sir. But there's always the possibility of an intruder, I suppose. Or someone familiar who knows the way." The notion lingered between them, charged with implication. Whimsy noted the tension in Maud's jaw, the kind born of fear and loyalty. Leaving the kitchen, Whimsy proceeded to the library, a cavernous room lined with heavy tomes and mementos of a bygone age. The scent of leather and dust was thick, and the long curtains hung motionless despite the breeze from the open window. He carefully examined the heavy door's lock and the surrounding floorboards. No signs of forced entry, yet the subtle imprint of a shoe on the carpet caught his eye, a heel slightly scuffed and a faint smudge of damp mud inconsistent with the usually pristine carpet. He stooped, tracing the outline with a finger, then rose, his mind assembling a picture. Someone had entered the library at night, deliberately, and left tracks to be noticed or missed. The heel's shape was unfamiliar, too narrow for the stocky boots of the gardener or the heavy shoes of the butler. From there, he moved to the servants' quarters, where the morning light revealed more than the night's shadows. He questioned the housemaid, Mary, a nervous girl with quick hands and darting eyes. "Mary, you said last night you heard something unusual." She nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir." A noise, like someone pacing outside the door to the colonel's room. I thought it was the wind at first, but it was too deliberate, too heavy. "Did you look to see who it might be?" "No, sir. I was too frightened. But I did see a shadow on the landing. Was it large or small?" "Large, like a man's whimsy's gaze softened." "Thank you, Mary. You've been very brave." He considered the implication. Someone had moved quietly but purposefully within the house during the night, close to the colonel's room. The shadow, the pacing, the faint muddy footprints, each detail weaving a thread toward some unseen figure. Returning to the ground floor, Whimsy found Leonora in the conservatory, gazing out into the garden with a pale, tense expression. The faint scent of jasmine mingled with the damp earth, and the early morning light softened her sharp features. "Miss Chilcombe," he began gently, "may I ask how you are bearing these troubles?" She turned, her eyes glistening. "Not well, Lord Peter. The house feels like a cage, and I fear for what secrets it holds." "Secrets often hide in plain sight," Whimsy said, "and the past is a cunning architect." She nodded slowly. Father was a difficult man. Proud, controlling, some said cruel, but I never believed he had enemies. Enmity is not always loud, Miss Chilcombe. Sometimes it festers in quiet corners. He noticed the glint of tears threatening and chose to shift the subject. "The will, then. Has Mr. Elphinstone shared more about this mysterious cousin, Charles Chilcombe?" She shook her head. "No one knows where he vanished, or why. Father never spoke of him." Whimsy smiled thinly. "A family secret, then?" "The darkest kind." His mind circled back to the discrepancies he had noted. The faulty clocks, the locked doors that might stick open, the odd footprints, and now this elusive relative whose absence lingered like a shadow over the estate. The day wore on with interviews of other household members, each repeating the familiar refrain. Nothing out of the ordinary. No strange visitors, no quarrels. Yet Whimsy's keen eye caught small contradictions, a hesitation here, a misplaced glance there, that suggested a careful weaving of silence. As evening approached, he revisited the scene of the earlier disturbance. The colonel's room. He opened the window wider, allowing the cool breeze to sweep through, then inspected the bed once more. The sheets bore a faint crease, as though someone had recently lain there, consistent with Mrs. Greaves' report that the bed was turned down twice in the same night. A slow smile touched his lips. "It seems our ghost is more corporeal than first suppose." Before retiring for the night, Whimsy paused in the hallway outside the library, where the air was cooler, the shadows deeper. He listened intently, hearing only the distant ticking of clocks out of sync, the faint creak of floorboards settling, and beneath it all, the subtle rhythm of a heart beating in quiet suspense. Tomorrow, he thought, would be a day of reckonings. For now, he allowed himself the luxury of a quiet cigar by the fire, the smoke curling like the elusive threads of truth he was determined to unravel. The house was restless, and so was he. The game was afoot, and the players all had secrets to keep. The dawn brought with it a fragile light, delicate as the first tentative notes of a string quartet, and with it a renewed determination in Lord Peter Whimsy. The shadows of Greystanes had not yet relinquished their hold, and he sensed that the day would yield secrets, though reluctant ones, and only at a price of patience and precision. The events of the previous night and the morning's revelations had shifted the landscape of the inquiry. The apparent tranquility of the household now seemed a veneer stretched taut over a deep current of tension. Whimsy's first engagement was to confer briefly with Inspector Sugg, who had arrived mid-morning, summoned by the vicar's urgent telegram. Sugg, a stocky man with an expression as immovable as the stones of the churchyard, was predisposed to favor the obvious solution and was impatient with nuances and subtleties. "Good morning, Lord Peter," he greeted with a nod. "Quite the scandal here. I gather you've been poking about already." "Merely observing, Inspector. And one must always attend to the clockwork of a household before accusing any of its cogs." Sugg snorted but said nothing further. Wimsey admired the inspector's devotion to procedure, but was aware that his zeal for prompt closure might soon clash with the intricacies of the case. The day's interviews commenced with the servants once more, this time with more pointed questions. Wimsey was particularly interested in the movements of individuals during the hours immediately preceding and following the colonel's death. The time between the post-meridian tea and the official discovery of the body at 8:30 had been marked by a curious silence, which the household seemed eager to fill with platitudes and alibis. Mrs. Grieve, now somewhat less guarded, recounted the evening's routine. After dinner, the colonel retired to his study, as was his habit. Mr. Dobb, the man who has taken over his duties, left him a glass of water and the evening paper. No one disturbed him after that. Did anyone hear any sounds or voices? Only the ticking of the clocks, and once or twice, the creak of the floorboards. The servants are used to it. Yet this routine seemed at odds with the report of pacing footsteps outside the colonel's room and the shadow glimpsed on the landing. In the servants' hall, Wimsey took note of a small detail. The housemaid Mary's boots were of a different make than those worn by the gardeners or footmen, lighter and more slender, matching the heel impression found in the library. When questioned about her movements, Mary hesitated, but then admitted to briefly visiting the library that evening, claiming to fetch a book she had left behind. "A curious hour for reading, Miss Mary," Wimsey remarked archly. She flushed. "I couldn't sleep, sir." This minor contradiction was neither damning nor exculpatory, but it contributed to the accumulating web of inconsistency. Meanwhile, Wimsey turned his attention to Leonora Chilcombe. He found her in the drawing-room, seated by the fire despite the warmth of the afternoon, a book unopened in her lap. Her eyes were restless, scanning the room as if seeking an escape from the house itself. "Miss Chilcombe," Wimsey began gently, "you seem burdened not only by grief but by uncertainty." She sighed. Father was a man of rigid principles, Lord Peter. Yet there were things he would never discuss, his past, for one. And this cousin Charles, he vanished years ago, leaving little but rumors. Rumors such as that he was involved in some unsavory business. Gambling debts, perhaps. But the family hushed it up. Wimsey's interest sharpened. The possibility of a shadowy relative with a motive, financial or otherwise, could complicate the picture considerably. His inquiries led him next to Mr. Elphinston, the vicar, who had been notably reserved but now seemed willing to divulge more. "Charles Chilcombe was a troubled man," Elphinston confessed. "His disappearance was sudden and mysterious. Some said he fled to escape his creditors, others whispered darker things, an accident perhaps, or worse. Did your late parishioner, the colonel, maintain contact with him?" "None that I am aware of, though I cannot speak for the family's private matters." Wimsey made a note to investigate Charles's whereabouts and possible ties to the estate further. Turning to more physical evidence, he examined the various clocks once more. The grandfather clock in the hall, the mantelpiece clock in the colonel's study, and a small carriage clock on the bedside table all told conflicting times, and the differences were not random but suggested deliberate misalignment. A curious fascination with temporal distortion, Wimsey mused aloud to Sugg, who was growing visibly impatient. The time of death could be anywhere in that gap. Sugg grunted. "Indeed," Wimsey replied, "and the clock's mischief may well be the perpetrator's alibi." Attention then fell upon the locks and doors. The door to the colonel's room was examined minutely. The lock showed no sign of forced entry, yet the latch had been manipulated, pressed from the inside, but not by the key. Whimsy deduced that the daughter could have been locked and unlocked without the use of a key, perhaps through some trick of the mechanism or a spare latch hidden from casual view. He tested the door himself, noting a slight resistance before the latch slipped free, a mechanism older than the current lock but still functional to those who knew of it. This was not the handiwork of an amateur. With this knowledge, the scope of potential suspects widened and the orderly timeline began to crumble. The afternoon waned, and Whimsy found himself in the drawing room with the family and closest staff assembled under the watchful eye of Inspector Sugg. The atmosphere was taut, polite smiles masked suspicion, and eyes darted with calculated care. "Before we proceed," Whimsy announced, "there is a matter of the missing silver salver from the Colonel's study. It was noted absent at the time of his passing, but has since been found concealed beneath the floorboards in the library." Gasps rippled through the group. "Curious, is it not?" Whimsy continued. "Such concealment suggests a secret, a hidden agenda. One wonders who had the knowledge and the motive to hide it." Leonora's face paled. I don't understand." Whimsy's gaze rested upon the butler, Mr. Griggs, who maintained his composure with the practiced calm of a man accustomed to scrutiny. "Mr. Griggs, might I ask your whereabouts during the evening hours?" "Serving in the dining hall, my lord, until the household retired." "And your knowledge of the salver's disappearance?" "None whatsoever, my lord. I would have reported it at once. Yet the concealment was deliberate, and the question of access and knowledge loomed large." Later, in private, Whimsy reviewed the day's findings, aware that the net was tightening, but still the fish slipped through. He reflected on the psychological undercurrents, the veiled resentments, the silent fears, the concealed histories, the missing cousin, the conflicting timelines, the covert footsteps. They all spoke of a house where truth was as carefully guarded as the family silver. Nightfall brought a chill and a restlessness that seemed to seep from the very walls. Whimsy, cigar in hand, pondered the evening's approach. His next steps would require finesse, a midnight vigil perhaps, or a subtle recreation of the scene. For now, the house settled into uneasy silence, but the gears of the mystery continued to turn, inexorable and unseen. Whimsy smiled quietly to himself. It is never the obvious shadow that carries the blame, but the one cast in plain sight. That night, as the household of Greystanes sank into an uneasy quiet, Lord Peter Whimsy resolved to turn the house itself into his confederate. The shadows might conceal many secrets, but they also bore witness. There was an unnatural stillness about the place, as if the walls themselves awaited his next move. The ticking of clocks, out of sync, yet ever present, marked the slow unfolding of the hours like the relentless turning of a page. Whimsy began by revisiting the scene of the Colonel's demise, walking through the dimly lit corridors with a soft footfall. The moonlight filtering through the window cast pale patterns across the polished floorboards, highlighting the faint muddy heel print in the library that had puzzled him all day. It was oddly out of place, too slender and refined for any of the staff, yet perfectly defined. He knelt beside it, tracing the shape once more, pondering its significance. The slipperiness of the mud suggested recent movement, and the damp earth's residue betrayed a presence outside as well as inside. The garden, with its winding paths and hidden alcoves, could easily serve as a clandestine route. His thoughts returned to Mary, the nervous housemaid who had confessed to visiting the library at an unusual hour. Was it possible she had seen or heard more than she dared admit? The fragment of her story nagged at him. Could she have been coerced, or was she protecting someone? A sudden noise, a soft rustling, made Whimsy stiffen, but it proved to be only a restless cat slipping through the doorway. The intrusion, trivial though it was, reminded him that he must remain vigilant. Every sound could be a clue or a red herring. He decided to station himself near the Colonel's room. The door, with its deceptive latch, was locked, but Whimsy had learned the trick to opening it without a key. With a gentle push, it gave way, and he stepped inside. The room was cooler here, the curtains drawn partly closed as if to shield some secret from the world. Whimsy's gaze swept the study carefully. The papers on the desk were arranged as if left in haste, the colonel's glasses resting askew atop an open ledger. The bed's sheets bore the faint impression of recent use, confirming Mrs. Greaves' earlier remark that it had been turned down twice that night. Most intriguing was a folded note pinned beneath a paperweight, a scrap of handwriting barely legible in the dim light. Meet me by the old elm tree. Midnight. Alone. C. The signature was nothing more than a single initial, but it struck Whimsy with the weight of a cipher. So it could be Charles Chilcombe, the missing cousin, or perhaps someone else entirely. This clandestine rendezvous at midnight was a lead that demanded following. Whimsy pocketed the note, securing it carefully before slipping out and closing the door behind him. He resolved to visit the garden once the clock struck 12. The hours till then passed with torturous slowness. He spent time cross-referencing statements, reviewing the timeline carefully. The overlapping testimonies of the servants, each with their slight inconsistencies, suggested a deeper web of concealment. Inspector Sugg, growing more restless with each passing moment, pressed for definitive answers. Whimsy, however, insisted on thoroughness. "Patience, Inspector," he said softly, "is the architect of truth." At last, the church clock began its sonorous toll. 1, 2, 3, 11 strikes echoed through the night. Whimsy moved stealthily through the silent house, careful to avoid waking the household, and stepped into the garden. The night air was crisp and carried the faint scent of damp earth and jasmine. The old elm tree stood at the far end of the grounds, its gnarled branches silhouetted starkly against the moonlit sky. Whimsy's breath came quietly, his senses alert to every sound. Minutes passed, then a shadow detached itself from the darkness beyond the tree. A figure emerged, tall, cloaked, moving with deliberate purpose. "Who goes there?" Whimsy called, stepping forward. The figure hesitated, then lowered a hood to reveal the pale face of Leonora Chilcombe. "My lord," she whispered, voice tense. "I had to come. There are truths you must hear, things no one else knows." Whimsy gestured for her to speak, aware that this confession might shift the entire balance of the investigation. She took a trembling breath and began. Father was not the man everyone believed. Beneath his stern exterior were debts and dangers I scarcely understood. Charles, my cousin, was involved in gambling and debts that Father tried desperately to conceal. "Do you know where Charles is now?" "No. Father said he fled, but I suspect something else happened, something darker." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Last night I overheard voices in the library, 2 men arguing. I dared not confront them, but it was clear that one sought to force Father into something." Whimsy's mind raced. The library, the muffled footsteps, the hidden salver, it all tied back to this desperate conflict. "Who are the men, Miss Chilcombe?" "I do not know." But one's voice was deep, commanding, the other agitated and pleading. "Did you recognize either?" "No." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Thank you for your courage in telling me." "We must tread carefully." Leonora's eyes searched his face for reassurance. "Please find the truth, my lord, before it is too late." As she slipped back into the shadows, Whimsy lingered a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. Returning to the house, he resolved to search the library once more by daylight, to find any trace of this secret meeting. He also planned to question the staff again, pressing for anyone who might have overheard or seen suspicious figures. The next morning, the atmosphere was taut. Whimsy called the household together under the guise of routine, but his intent was clear. Each face was a mask, some cracked by anxiety. He began with the butler, Mr. Griggs. "Mr. Griggs, were you in the library last night after the household retired?" The butler's eyes flickered, but his tone was steady. "No, my lord. I was in the servants' quarters until bedtime." "And yet the salver was hidden beneath the floorboards. Do you know how it came to be there?" Griggs hesitated, then said, "I do not, my lord." But the colonel was concerned about theft, especially after the recent troubles. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Troubles such as?" The butler's face was unreadable. "Family disputes, Lord Peter. Old grievances that sometimes boil beneath polite conversation," Wimsey made a note. Next, he questioned Mary again, gently this time. "Mary, you mentioned hearing footsteps last night." "Did you see who it was?" She swallowed nervously. "No, my lord. But I did hear a door close softly and footsteps fading down the corridor." "Could you identify the shoes that made the prints in the library?" She looked down. "I'm not sure, sir. But they were finer than mine." The insinuation was clear, and Wimsey knew to tread carefully. His search in the library revealed a small hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, near where the salver had been found. Inside was a folded letter, aged but legible. It spoke of a clandestine meeting, debts owed, and threats of exposure. The signature was blurred, but the intent was unmistakable. Wimsey pieced together the threads. The colonel, under pressure from an unknown adversary, had been drawn into a desperate situation. The missing cousin's shadow loomed large, but perhaps the real danger lay closer. His thoughts turned to the housekeeper, Mrs. Grieve, whose subtle evasions had seemed significant. A discreet search of her quarters revealed a ledger hidden beneath a loose floorboard, chronicling payments made secretly, and a series of cryptic notes referencing protection and silence. The puzzle was crystallizing. The colonel had been ensnared in a web of debts and threats, with the household itself harboring secrets and perhaps a traitor. The weight of these discoveries hung heavy in the air as Wimsey prepared for the next phase of his investigation. The clockwork of Greystanes was slowly revealing its inner workings, but the hands of time were running out. Wimsey's mind worked with a quiet urgency as the morning sun rose higher, casting long shafts of light through the lace curtains of Greystanes' drawing room. The revelations of the previous night had shifted the investigation from a simple murder mystery to a complex web of psychological and financial entanglements. There was no haste in Wimsey's manner. He wore the guise of polite curiosity, but beneath it lay the sharpened edge of his intellect, quietly dissecting every detail. He summoned Mrs. Grieve to the drawing room under the pretext of needing her assistance with the household inventory. The housekeeper arrived promptly, her posture stiff with the invisible weight of secrets. Her eyes flicked briefly to Wimsey's face, an unspoken question lurking behind the veneer of servitude. "Mrs. Grieve," Wimsey began, selecting his words with care, "I find myself puzzling over the curious ledger I came upon. It seems you have been keeping meticulous accounts of some unusual transactions." The woman's lip twitched imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure. "My lord, I assure you, all accounts are for the proper maintenance of the household." "But there are entries marked protection and silence," Wimsey pressed, producing the ledger with a flourish. "These are hardly typical expenses for a country estate." Mrs. Grieve's eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice remained even. "There have been disturbances, my lord. Unpleasant visitors, threats that required careful handling. The colonel was most particular about discretion." Wimsey inclined his head thoughtfully. "I see. And these disturbances, might they relate to the debts owed by Charles Chilcombe?" A flicker of something, fear, guilt, passed over Mrs. Grieve's face. "Perhaps, my lord. The family has long shadows." Before he could pursue further, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Inspector Sugg entered, his expression a mixture of impatience and deference. "Lord Peter, we've just received word from the village constable. A strange visitor was seen near the old elm last night, around the time you spoke with Miss Chilcombe." Wimsey arched an eyebrow. "Oh, pray do elaborate." "A man, dressed as a labourer, with a distinctive limp." He was asking about the Chilcombe family. Appearing quite agitated, Wimsey's eyes gleamed with interest. "A limp, you say? That is a detail not to be overlooked. Do we have any idea who this gentleman might be?" Sugg shook his head. "No identification yet, but the description matches a local named Thomas Bale, a rather unsavory character with a history of debts and petty crime." "Excellent," Wimsey murmured, already piecing together the strands. "A man with motive and opportunity. We must pay Mr. Bale a visit." The afternoon found Wimsey and Sugg walking the narrow lanes that led to Bale's modest cottage on the edge of the village. The air was thick with the scent of peat smoke and damp earth. Bale himself was a gaunt figure, his clothes threadbare, and the limp pronounced but natural. "Mr. Bale," Wimsey began, his tone courteous yet firm, "we understand you were near the old elm tree last night. Care to explain your business there?" Bale's eyes darted nervously. I was there, looking for Charles Chilcombe. Heard he might be hiding. And what is your interest in Mr. Chilcombe?" Bale shrugged, just wanting to settle a score. "He owes me money. Gambling debts." "I'm not the only one." I reckon Wimsey noted the undercurrent of resentment, but sensed there was more behind the man's agitation. "Did you see or hear anything unusual while you were there?" Bale hesitated, then nodded. "I saw a light in the library window. Heard voices, 2 men arguing, fierce-like. Couldn't make out all the words, but one spoke of exposure and payment. Did either mention your name or Charles?" "No, but the tone was serious. Made me think the Colonel was in deeper trouble than we knew." Wimsey filed this away, the puzzle growing more intricate. He thanked Bale and left with a new thread to pursue. Back at Greystanes, the evening descended with a curious stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of settling timbers. Wimsey requested the household be gathered for a discreet inquiry, a chance to observe their reactions under the pretense of routine questioning. He began with the household maid, Mary, who looked paler and more withdrawn than before. "Mary, you mentioned hearing footsteps late last night. Can you recall more precisely where?" She swallowed and nodded toward the corridor leading to the library. "Just outside the door, sir. I was tidying near the staircase when I heard the voices." "Voices?" Wimsey's tone was mild but insistent. "How many?" "2, sir. A man's and another man's, I think. One was angry. Did you recognize either?" She shook her head. "No, sir." Wimsey's gaze was steady. "And yet you were frightened enough not to investigate?" Yes, sir. The house feels different after dark." A faint smile touched Wimsey's lips. Fear was a universal language, but often it disguised more than it revealed. Turning his attention to Mr. Griggs, the butler, Wimsey inquired about the peculiar detail of the house clocks, which had not been synchronized. "Mr. Griggs, you maintain the clocks at Greystanes, do you not?" "I do, my lord. Yet they differ by several minutes from each other. The grandfather clock in the hall runs fast by nearly 7 minutes compared to the library clock." Griggs shifted uncomfortably. "The clocks have been troublesome lately, my lord." The colonel insisted on the hall clock being slightly ahead to ensure promptness. An admirable intention, but one that might confuse matters in certain circumstances. The butler's gaze dropped. "Indeed, my lord." Wimsey's mind ticked over the implications. If the clocks were purposely misaligned, it could easily provide a cover for discrepancies in the timeline. The murderer might have exploited this very detail to establish a false alibi or to mislead witnesses. He noted, too, that the soundproofing of the library door, remarkably effective, was an unusual luxury for a country house, suggesting the colonel had wished to keep certain conversations absolutely private. With this in mind, Whimsy summoned the household again. "I believe the time has come to establish a precise chronology of last night's events. I ask each of you to recount your movements from 9 o'clock onwards." The responses were hesitant, contradictory in places. The cook claimed to be in the kitchen preparing the late meal, yet no one recalled seeing or hearing her. The gardener swore he was out tending the greenhouses, though it was pitch dark at the time. Small details, the rustling of curtains, the flicker of a candle in the hallway, emerged like shadows from a mist. Whimsy's eyes lingered on the framed photograph of the colonel above the mantelpiece. The man had been a study in control, accustomed to command and secrecy. It was evident that his final hours had been entangled with betrayal and fear. As the assembled faces grew weary under the weight of questioning, Whimsy felt the first stirrings of a theory. The footprints, the muffled voices, the misaligned clocks, all were pieces of a puzzle pointing toward a meticulously orchestrated deception. Yet the heart of the matter remained elusive. The evening waned, and Whimsy excused himself to the library. Alone, he replayed the fragments in his mind. The folded note, the secret ledger, the whispered threats. A sudden thought struck him. What if the key to the entire mystery lay not in the overt actions of the household, but in the psychological manipulation of its members? He recalled Leonora's words. Something darker. Perhaps the colonel had been ensnared by fear, not only of creditors or kin, but of the unraveling of his own identity. Whimsy lit a cigarette, the blue smoke curling upward as he mused. The clues were converging, but the ultimate truth would require one more step. A revelation that would lay bare the motive not as a matter of debt or greed, but as a tragedy born of human frailty. Tomorrow, he decided, would be the day to test the chronology against the alibis, to probe the invisible fissures beneath the surface of grey stains. For now, the house settled again into silence, but the game was far from over. The bed had indeed been turned down, twice, but the bed in which the colonel died concealed far more than the casual visitor could guess. And Lord Peter Whimsy, with his arch smile and keen eye, was ready to uncover it all. The dawn was a pale and merciless thing, stealing through the tall mullioned windows of the library with an unwelcome clarity. Lord Peter Whimsy sat before the large oak desk, the clutter of papers and scattered cigarette ash, at odds with the razor focus now reigning in his mind. Last night's revelations and interviews had left a tangle of half-truths and evaded glances, but his habitual patience promised a reckoning. His thoughts returned to the curious ledger, to Mrs. Greaves' subtle flinching when questioned on those protection and silence payments. The colonel had, Whimsy surmised, maintained more than just a financial balance. There were debts of a far more delicate kind, moral, psychological, and someone was intent on keeping them concealed. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Miss Leonora Chilcombe entered, her manner at once hesitant and resolute. "Lord Peter, may I disturb your thoughts for a moment?" He gestured to a chair with a faint smile. "Disturb away, Miss Chilcombe. Thoughts, like servants, must occasionally be directed or dismissed." She seated herself carefully, folding her hands. "I've been thinking about the library door." It was soundproofed, as you noted. "But why? The colonel wasn't a man given to eccentricities." Whimsy nodded. "A prudent question. It implies he wished to keep certain conversations absolutely private. And the question, of course, is from whom, or for what purpose?" Leonora glanced towards the window, her voice lowering. "The village whispers about the colonel's past. Debts, yes, but also debts of honor. There were people he feared, dangerous men who would stop at nothing." "Fascinating," Whimsy murmured. "And yet, the debts recorded here," he tapped the ledger on the desk, "do not all correspond to financial sums. Protection, a euphemism perhaps." "Precisely," she said. And the visitors at the elm tree last night, you think that Mr. Bale was one of them? Whimsy smiled slightly, recalling the limping man's nervy tale. One visitor, yes, but I suspect there were others. Our mysterious visitor is more than just a disgruntled debtor. He rose and crossed the room, looking out over the garden where the old elm stood sentinel. We must turn our attention once again to the timeline. It is there, in the precise alignment of minutes and movements, that truth will unveil itself. Leonora nodded. I've also spoken with some of the villagers. They mentioned seeing a stranger lingering near the chapel ruins. Someone dressed oddly, almost like a vicar. Whimsy's eyes gleamed. An intriguing detail. A red herring, perhaps, or a deliberate distraction? They moved together to the large wall clock in the hall, a curious piece with its face slightly tilted, the pendulum swinging with a peculiar irregularity. Have you noticed, Miss Chilcombe, how the clocks refuse to tell the same time? He mused. She frowned. Yes, it has struck me as odd. The grandfather clock here runs several minutes fast. Exactly so. And when one relies on clocks as arbiters of truth, Whimsy said, a misalignment can be exploited with surgical precision. Returning to the library, Whimsy took up a small notebook. Tell me, what can you recall of the evening of the Colonel's death? Your own movements, conversations, the sounds you heard? Leonora's gaze grew distant. I was with Charles until near 10 o'clock. He was anxious, spoke of debts and threats, but refused to confide fully. And after you left? I went to my room, but I heard voices. 2 men arguing downstairs. I tried to listen, but the door was closed. Did you hear any names? Words? Only fragments, exposure, payment, silence, and something about a last warning. Whimsy made a note. The phrase, last warning, an ultimatum. Very telling. They agreed to question the servants once more, focusing on the chronology and any unusual behavior. Mrs. Grieve, summoned again, appeared less guarded this time. My lord, I may have withheld certain things out of fear, for the family's reputation. Whimsy's tone was gentle but firm. Fear is an understandable companion, Mrs. Grieve, but truth is the only path to peace. She hesitated, then revealed, there was a visitor last week, a man claiming to be from London. He spoke of a debt far larger than any here, one that could ruin the Colonel utterly. Did the Colonel see this man? No, only I did. He left a card, but I hid it. Whimsy's curiosity deepened. Might I see the card? She produced a small worn calling card, bearing the name Malcolm H. Fairfax, solicitor. A London solicitor, Whimsy said slowly, implying legal matters far from the village. The plot thickens. Next, he questioned Mr. Griggs again about the clocks. The clocks, my lord, Griggs explained, were never synchronized. The Colonel insisted the hall clock run fast, but the library clock was set to Greenwich Mean Time exactly. He said it helped him keep his appointments. Convenient for alibi construction, Whimsy murmured. And the soundproofing? He pressed. That was a recent addition, my lord. The Colonel ordered it after he began receiving threats, Whimsy mused aloud. Threats that required silence, protection, and secrecy. As dusk approached, Whimsy took a solitary stroll through the village. He stopped at the chapel ruins, now bathed in fading light, imagining the ghostly figure of the vicar-like stranger seen by the villagers. The eerie atmosphere was a tantalizing misdirection, a cloak for very human deeds. Returning to Greystanes, he asked the constable for details about the visitor at the elm. Mr. Bale mentioned hearing voices. Did you hear anything yourself? The constable shook his head. Only distant sounds, an argument, but no names. Whimsy's mind returned to the inconsistency of the clocks, the soundproof library, the ledger entries, and now the mysterious solicitor from London. All signs pointed to a carefully engineered deception, designed to shield the true motive behind a facade of financial ruin. That night, Whimsy requested access to the Colonel's private papers, a trove previously untouched. Among the correspondence, he discovered a letter addressed in a shaky hand, full of pleas for mercy and hints of a secret past. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the content was clear. The Colonel had been blackmailed over a scandal long buried, one that would ruin his family and haunt their name. The letter's date, only a week before his death, was significant. Whimsy felt the slow, inexorable turn of the investigation entering its next phase. The mystery was no longer one of debts and threats alone, but of identity, betrayal, and the fragile human will to preserve dignity at any cost. With a faint, arch smile, he prepared for the confrontation that would soon force the shadowed truths into the harsh light of day. The bed may have been turned down twice, but the heart of Greystanes was still restless, and Lord Peter Whimsy was the only one who could finally lay it to rest. The following morning arrived with the stubborn fog lingering like a spectre determined to shroud the secrets of Greystanes. Lord Peter Whimsy, as ever, moved with a languid purpose, the faint creak of his boots against the polished floor echoing softly through the silent halls of the manor. The house was steeped in the hushed anxiety of those who knew more than they dared admit, and the faint scent of tobacco and aged paper clung to the air like a guilty whisper. Whimsy returned to the library, where the Colonel's private correspondence awaited his scrutiny. His fingers, deft and patient, sifted through the letters once more, tracing the trembling script of the blackmail note. The letter was unsigned, a deliberate touch that added a layer of menace to its content. The writer hinted at a past indiscretion, capable of shattering all that is held dear. Whimsy's mind churned over the possibilities. A scandal, an affair, or something more pernicious. The butler, Griggs, appeared at the threshold, bearing a small envelope marked with the Colonel's personal seal. "This was found tucked within the false back of the desk drawer, my lord," he explained with the habitual restraint of a man accustomed to hiding his emotions beneath a veneer of stoicism. Whimsy opened the envelope carefully. Inside lay a series of cryptic notes, meticulously penned in a cipher of sorts, an odd mix of letters and numbers that hinted at a code known only to the Colonel and, presumably, his correspondent. The existence of such a cipher suggested that the Colonel had been involved in clandestine dealings, or at the very least, felt compelled to protect certain communications from prying eyes. "The Colonel was more secretive than we supposed," Whimsy murmured, pocketing the notes. "We must find the key to this cipher. Its solution may unlock the very heart of this mystery." Leonora Chilcombe arrived shortly after, bearing news from the village. "Lord Peter, there is talk of a visitor to the solicitor's office in London, the same Malcolm Fairfax. He has been seen meeting a Mr. George Anselm, a gentleman known to have ties with both the Colonel and a rather shadowy society hereabouts." Whimsy's eyebrows rose. "Shadowy society? How deliciously Gothic," she nodded. "Indeed, though I suspect the truth is more mundane, if no less sinister." "Let us not dismiss the mundane," Whimsy replied. "It is often the cloak beneath which villainy lurks." By mid-afternoon, Whimsy and Leonora were en route to the solicitor's office in London. The journey was uneventful, save for Whimsy's occasional musings on the unreliability of timekeeping and the curious discrepancies noted in the clocks back at Greystanes. His suspicion that these minor aberrations were intentionally engineered had not waned. At the solicitor's office, a modest establishment tucked in a quiet street near Lincoln's Inn, they were met by a sharp-eyed clerk who regarded their inquiry with thinly veiled suspicion. Malcolm Fairfax himself was out, but the clerk allowed them access to his appointment ledger under the condition that they respect client confidentiality. Among the names recorded was George Anselm, with a meeting noted 2 days prior, the same day the Colonel had been seen in considerable distress. A discreet inquiry in the surrounding area yielded the discovery that Anselm was a man of some standing, but shadowed by rumors of financial impropriety and questionable associations. As Wimsey and Leonora prepared to leave, the clerk produced a letter found among Fairfax's correspondence. It was addressed to the colonel and bore a postmark from a coastal town not far from Greystanes. The letter spoke of debts unpaid and consequences impending, signed only with the initials G.A. Back at Greystanes, the fog had lifted, revealing the manicured gardens bathed in a cold, brittle light. Wimsey gathered the household in the drawing-room under the guise of a casual conversation, though his mind was already mapping out the next stage of his inquiry. Turning to the assembled group, he remarked dryly, "One might imagine that the colonel's affairs were less tangled than a Gordian knot. Yet here we find threads connecting London solicitors, shadowy gentlemen, and cryptic ciphers. I dare say the true motive is hidden in plain sight, wrapped in layers of social decorum and fear." Mrs. Greaves' hands trembled ever so slightly as she refilled a cup of tea. Leonora's expression was guarded, while the butler maintained his imperturbable facade. Charles Chilcombe, the colonel's nephew, watched Wimsey with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. Wimsey addressed Charles directly. "Your uncle was a man of habit, yes? Punctual to a fault." Charles nodded. "Indeed. Never late for an appointment, never missed a letter. Then how do we account for the discrepancies in the timeline? The meetings he purportedly kept and those he most assuredly did not?" Charles' face paled. I don't understand." "That, my dear Charles, is precisely the point," Wimsey said, lighting a cigarette with meticulous care. "We are dealing with deception on multiple levels, not only in actions but in the very fabric of time as presented to us. Someone has manipulated the records, the clocks, and the stories to construct an alibi as delicate as it is fragile." He paused, surveying the faces before him. "Let us consider the library once more. The soundproofing was added recently, was it not?" Griggs confirmed. "Yes, my lord." After the threats began. Threats indeed. Yet why seal off one room when the entire house might be a theater for secrets? The answer lies in what was said within those walls, words intended for one pair of ears only. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. And what of the letter from the coastal town? Could it be that the colonel's secret was not local but something more widespread, perhaps connected to a past he sought to bury under the veneer of country gentility? Leonora ventured. Could the visitor at the elm tree be tied to this past? A reminder that the colonel could not escape his debts, both monetary and moral? A logical supposition, Wimsey agreed, but it is insufficient on its own. We must have proof, corroboration. He turned to Mrs. Greaves. "You have lived here long, have you not? Observed the comings and goings, seen the undercurrents beneath the polite smiles?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "There is one thing I have not yet told you. The night before the colonel died, I noticed a faint light in the chapel ruins. Not from a candle, but from something electric, a small lamp. It shone intermittently, as if signaling. Wimsey's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. A clandestine meeting place then? The ruins, the lamp, an attempt to communicate away from prying eyes. He leaned forward. "Miss Chilcombe, I suggest we investigate the ruins at midnight. There is much to be learned from shadows and silence." The household exchanged uneasy glances, but no one protested. As night fell once more over Greystanes, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared for the stakeout, his thoughts weaving the disparate strands of evidence into a tapestry he could almost see completed. The bed had indeed been turned down twice, but the true story, the one hiding behind polite facades and whispered fears, was about to be revealed in the cold moonlight among the chapel ruins. The game was afoot, and no detail, no matter how trivial, would be overlooked. The moon hung low and silvered over Greystanes as Lord Peter Wimsey and Leonora Chilcombe moved with quiet purpose through the grounds, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth and carpet of fallen leaves. The ruined chapel, a Gothic silhouette of crumbling stone and twisted ivy, loomed ahead like a sentinel of forgotten sins. Wimsey's mind was alert, balancing on the knife edge between patience and impatience as he prepared to uncover the last pieces of the puzzle. As they approached the chapel ruins, a faint, intermittent glow caught their attention, just as Mrs. Grieve had described. The flicker of an electric lamp, concealed behind a shattered window, pulsed rhythmically, casting irregular shadows that danced across the broken altar and moss-covered stones. It was an anachronism against the ancient stonework, a modern beacon signaling some hidden communication. Wimsey crouched low, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. "This is no mere happenstance," he murmured. "Our unknown correspondent is both clever and cautious, choosing the ruins for their isolation, the darkness for concealment, yet relying on light to send a message." Leonora nodded, her breath misting in the chill night air. But what could the signal mean? And to whom is it directed? A faint sound disturbed the stillness, a soft rustling behind the western buttress. Wimsey and Leonora exchanged a glance, then moved silently toward the source. From behind a pile of rubble emerged a figure, shrouded in a dark cloak, face obscured by the brim of a hat. "Hold!" Wimsey called softly, stepping forward with a measured calm. "We mean you no harm." "But you have been watched." The figure hesitated, then pulled back the cloak, revealing the sharp, angular features of George Anselm. His eyes, bright with a mix of defiance and desperation, met Wimsey's unwavering gaze. "Lord Peter," Anselm greeted with a sardonic smile. "I wondered how long it would take for you to discover this little rendezvous." Wimsey inclined his head slightly, a gesture of polite curiosity. "Mr. Anselm, your presence here is most inconvenient for the resolution of our inquiries. Might I ask why you choose such a dramatic location for your nocturnal communications?" Anselm's smile faded, replaced by a shadow of something darker. "Because, Lord Peter, the past clings to Greystanes as tightly as ivy to these stones. My debts, my mistakes, are all part of a history too painful to face in daylight. Yet you choose to hide your meetings in the ruins, signaling with an electric lamp. It seems a curious method of concealment." "Necessity breeds oddities," Anselm replied. "I had no choice but to warn Colonel Chilcombe of dangers approaching, men who do not care for subtlety or gentle reminders." Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "Danger, you say? Could these men be the same who threatened the Colonel and sent the blackmail note?" Anselm nodded gravely. "Indeed. But the truth is more tangled than simple threats. The Colonel owed more than money. He owed a debt of silence, a secret that would ruin lives if revealed." "Which secret might that be?" Wimsey pressed. Before Anselm could answer, a soft footfall interrupted the moment. From the shadows emerged Charles Chilcombe, his face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. "Uncle's debts, his secrets, do not drag me into your sordid games," he spat, stepping between Wimsey and Anselm. Wimsey regarded the nephew with cool amusement. "Mr. Chilcombe, you seem passionate on the subject. Perhaps you have more knowledge than you care to share." Charles's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. Wimsey motioned for calm. "Let us return to the manor. It seems the night holds more revelations than even I anticipated." Back inside Greystanes, the atmosphere was taut with unspoken tensions. Wimsey gathered the key players, the household, the visitors, the reluctant witnesses. In the drawing room, the flickering firelight casting long shadows that seemed to mimic the hidden truths yet to surface. Wimsey began. "The night's revelations bring us closer to understanding the intricate web woven around Colonel Chilcombe. Mr. Anselm has confirmed the existence of threats and debts, not merely financial but of a secret nature. One with the power to destroy reputations and lives. He paused, eyes settling on each face. Our task is to untangle these threads with precision. The blackmail note, the ciphered messages, the manipulated timelines, all are part of a grander design. Whimsy turned to Charles. You, nephew, have shown an unusual zeal to distance yourself from these sordid games. Might that zeal stem from a personal stake in these secrets? Charles faltered, then nodded reluctantly. I admit there are things I have hidden, matters of inheritance and family pride. Ah, inheritance, Whimsy mused, tapping his fingers lightly. A motive as old as murder itself. Leonora stepped forward. But if the Colonel's secret is so devastating, why was it not revealed sooner? Why maintain the facade? Because, Whimsy answered, fear is a powerful master. Fear of disgrace, of scandal, and above all, fear of losing control. He produced the ciphered notes and spread them on the table. These coded messages suggest a double life, a compartmentalized existence where truths were fragmented and obscured. With a flourish, Whimsy began to decode the cipher aloud, revealing a string of names and dates connected to an obscure legal case involving disputed land rights along the coast. The case was more than a simple property dispute. It involved accusations of fraud, coercion, and a shadowy consortium eager to silence opposition. Colonel Chilcomb found himself ensnared in a legal and moral quagmire. Whimsy concluded. His blackmailer was no mere opportunist, but an agent of this consortium, demanding silence at any cost. The room absorbed this revelation with a mixture of shock and resignation. Whimsy's gaze fixed once more on Charles. Your eagerness to deny involvement now takes on new meaning. Were you complicit in this attempt to suppress the truth, or merely fearful of the consequences? Charles's composure cracked. I wanted to protect the family name, yes, but I swear I did not harm my uncle. And yet, Whimsy said quietly, someone went to great lengths to stage the scene of the Colonel's death, to manipulate clocks, silence doors, and fabricate alibis. The question remains. Who? Suddenly, the butler Griggs cleared his throat and stepped forward, a rare tremor in his usually steady voice. If I may, my lord. There is one detail overlooked. The missing silver salver, the one used for the Colonel's letters and such. It was found this morning, hidden behind the panels in the study, with traces of powder upon it. Powder? Whimsy asked sharply. Gunpowder residue, Griggs confirmed. Small but enough to suggest it was used to clean or perhaps conceal evidence. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. An excellent observation, Griggs. This is no accidental hiding place, but a deliberate attempt to obstruct the investigation. He turned to the assembled company. The culprit not only planned the murder, but sought to manipulate every detail, from the household clocks to the very objects that witnessed the daily rituals of this house. Whimsy's voice dropped to a near whisper. And now, the final question. Who benefits most from the Colonel's death? The room fell silent, the weight of the question settling like dust in the heavy air. Whimsy's smile was slight but knowing. The answer lies not in shadows or superstitions, but in the cold logic of motive, means, and opportunity. He glanced at each face in turn, letting the tension simmer. Soon, the truth will walk into this room and no longer hide behind the veils of secrecy. The fire in the drawing room sputtered low, casting a tremulous glow over the gathered assembly. A heavy silence clung to the walls, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning logs and the faint ticking of a distant clock. An ironic reminder of the very temporal puzzles that Lord Peter Whimsy had so deftly teased apart this evening. Whimsy stood at the hearth, fingers steepled, eyes bright with the kind of gleam that precedes a final, well-earned revelation. The guests and household alike sat or stood, some nervously clutching their programs or handkerchiefs, others with faces drawn tight, as if bracing against the storm they knew was imminent. "My friends," Whimsy began, his voice calm and measured, "we have danced around the edges of the truth, tiptoed through a labyrinth of shadows and half-truths. Now, it is time to illuminate the heart of the matter." He swept a glance across the faces. Each was a potential suspect, an actor in the grim theater that had unfolded at Grey Staines. The Colonel's death, initially perceived as a tragic accident or a simple murder, was far more complex, woven from threads of deception, fear, and ambition. "Let us recall," Whimsy continued, "the curious series of facts that, at first glance, seemed mere minutiae. The misaligned clocks, the tampered door locks, the mysterious cipher, and that singular absence, the silver salver which, thanks to the diligence of our butler Griggs, was found secreted away, bearing traces of gunpowder." He paused, allowing the weight of those details to sink in. These were not random acts, but a carefully orchestrated performance. The question before us: who directed this macabre play and for what purpose? The silence deepened, and Whimsy's gaze settled on Charles Chilcombe. "You, sir, have expressed a great interest in preserving the family's honor and legacy. Yet that interest seemed to border on desperation when confronted with the shadow of your uncle's secret debts and his entanglements with a shadowy consortium." Charles shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "Your eagerness to dismiss your involvement," Whimsy went on, "might well be a mask, yet your very presence at certain critical moments strains credulity. For example, your arrival at the chapel ruins late in the evening, moments before our meeting with Mr. Anselm, was hardly coincidental." Charles's face twitched involuntarily. "I was concerned for my uncle's safety," he muttered. "Of course. Concern is a commendable human trait," Whimsy replied with a thin smile. "But concern does not explain the altered timings of the manor's clocks, which you alone had access to before the murder." He turned now to George Anselm. "And you, sir, have admitted to secret meetings, coded messages, and a willingness to communicate with unsavory parties. Yet your efforts were ostensibly to warn the Colonel." Anselm nodded soberly. "I did what I could, Lord Peter. But I am not the murderer. Indeed, your confession of clandestine communication does not imply guilt for murder, only for involvement in the murky web of intrigue." Whimsy's eyes then caught those of Leonora Chilcombe, whose pale face betrayed her fatigue but also a steely resolve. "Miss Chilcombe, you have been a steadfast presence, but you too carry secrets. Your trips to London, your quiet conversations, the book of occult lore found among your belongings." Leonora's lips parted in surprise. "I was merely researching family history and trying to understand the legacy we all inherit." "A noble pursuit, but one that seemed to unsettle some," Whimsy said lightly. "The occult, while not the cause of this crime, provided a useful smokescreen for more earthly misdeeds." He paced slowly before the fireplace, gathering his thoughts like chess pieces for the final move. "Let us consider the timeline once more. Colonel Chilcombe retired to his study shortly before 10 o'clock. At approximately 10:15, a gunshot was heard, though strangely muffled, as if by a thick curtain or padded door. The clocks were adjusted thereafter to suggest an earlier or later time, and the locks on the study door were manipulated to delay discovery. The silver salver, bearing gunpowder residue, was hidden post-haste, an attempt to remove traces of evidence." He looked directly at the assembled group. "All of these actions indicate someone intimately familiar with the household and its workings." Whimsy stepped forward, drawing from his pocket a folded sheet of paper, the decrypted cipher. "This document," he said, "contains a list of names, dates, and locations, elements of a secret ledger implicating certain individuals in the fraudulent appropriation of land and funds." The Colonel had uncovered this scandal and, fearing its public exposure, had been blackmailed into silence. He unfolded the paper to reveal a series of names. One name here is particularly significant, Mr. Frederick Mallory. A hush fell. Frederick Mallory, the solicitor, had appeared throughout the investigation as a benign, if somewhat fastidious, figure. Yet now, under Wimsey's scrutiny, he seemed less innocent. Wimsey's voice took on an edge of finality. Mr. Mallory possessed both the motive and the means to silence the colonel permanently. The forged documents found in his briefcase, the unexplained late-night visits, and his sudden, nervous departure from the village earlier today all point toward his guilt. Mallory, who had been standing silently near the doorway, paled visibly. "You have no proof," he stammered. "Proof," Wimsey said, "lies in the alignment of events, in the altered clock hands, the tampered locks, the gunpowder on the salver, and your desperate attempts to conceal the ledger. The truth, Mr. Mallory, is more persistent than deception." At this, Mallory's facade crumbled. He lunged toward the door, but Wimsey's voice stopped him with the precision of a rifle shot. "Hold, Mr. Mallory. Your escape would be futile. The police are en route, alerted by Mrs. Greaves' timely report. Your confession will be more palatable if given voluntarily." Mallory sank back, defeated, muttering, "It was necessary to protect the interests of those who trusted me." Wimsey gave a small, sardonic smile. "A noble sentiment, albeit one badly executed. Greed and fear make poor masters of discretion." The household exhaled collectively as the tension ebbed. Charles Chilcombe slumped into a chair, relief and regret mingling in his eyes. Leonora rested a hand on his shoulder, the weight of the night's revelations heavy upon them all. Wimsey turned toward the window, where the first faint blush of dawn tinged the horizon. And so the bed was already turned down, the stage set for a final act of betrayal and murder. He allowed himself a moment's satisfaction, then added with characteristic dry wit, "It seems, after all, that even the most Gothic of settings cannot escape the mundane sins of human nature." The inspector from Scotland Yard arrived moments later, the ritual arrest made with minimal fuss. Wimsey, ever the gentleman, declined to linger for the formalities. As he and Leonora prepared to depart, Wimsey offered a parting observation. "One learns, Miss Chilcombe, that no matter the time or place, the machinery of human folly turns on the same ancient cogs: jealousy, fear, and the craving for control." Leonora smiled faintly, the long night's ordeal etched into her features. "And yet, Lord Peter, it is the clarity of your logic and the steadiness of your gaze that cut through the shadows." Wimsey touched his hat, his expression a blend of modesty and sardonic amusement. "Logic is merely the lantern in the dark corridors of the mind. One must never mistake it for illumination itself." With that, he stepped into the awaiting motor car, the wheels crunching softly over the gravel as gray stains receded into the morning mist. Behind him, the manor's windows caught the dawn's first light, silent witnesses to secrets unveiled, and the end of another tale in the curious chronicles of Lord Peter Wimsey. The motor car's engine purred steadily as it carried Lord Peter Wimsey away from Greystanes, but his mind was far from the gentle English countryside retreat. The night's grim revelations still clung to him, the intricate dance of deceit and desperation finally untangled, yet the human cost stubbornly lingering in his thoughts. Yet there remained one final piece, a last delicate flourish needed to complete the portrait of that dark night. A detail so subtle that it had slipped past every eye save his own. Returning to the drawing-room in his mind's eye, Wimsey recalled the curious arrangement of the curtains. Not merely drawn, but layered unevenly, as if to mask something, or someone, from casual view. It was, after all, beneath those heavy draperies that a faint shadow had been glimpsed during his initial inspection, a figure neither wholly seen nor entirely imagined. He had not mentioned it before, knowing that the truth often demands patience and that the weight of premature revelation might crush the delicate threads that bound the case together. The evening's final assembly had made clear the outline of the plot, but the subtle artifice, the psychological manipulation, had been the true motive. Mallory's carefully staged alibi, the falsified ledger, even the misdirection of clocks and locks. These were tools wielded with the precision of a surgeon, yet the blade's purpose was far more intimate. It was the Colonel's own niece, Leonora, who unwittingly supplied the final clue. Her frequent visits to London, her obscure interest in the occult, and the curious manuscript she had been seen carrying all